You're listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
Welcome to episode 99 of A Life in Ruins podcast, where we investigate the careers of those living a life in ruins. I am your host, Carlton Gover, and I am joined by my co-host, Connor Johnnon. For this week's episode, we are joined by Dr. Amanda Butler, who is an assistant professor in the Department of Anthropology and Earth Science at Minnesota State University Moorhead. Dr. Butler, thank you so much for being on the podcast. How are you doing this morning?
I'm doing okay. That's a Midwestern lie. I'm just hanging on by a thread, but I say I'm okay.
Excellent. And so I first met you at this Past Plains conference in Boulder, and I really loved your presentations and your research and what you did for your dissertation, and have been very excited to have you on podcast today to talk more about it. So thank you so much for being willing to share that. And just kind of kicking us off, like what were your first experiences in anthropology growing up? Like, were you a dinosaur kid, history buff, nature nerd? Where did that primary catalyst of inspiration come from?
Yeah, I was kind of I'm always a dork. I am a dork. But like historically, I always knew that I was going to be an archaeologist. I was one of those rare people that when they asked you what you were going to be, I was going to do archaeology or be the president of the United States. So I always tell my students there's still time for that one. But archaeology was what I wanted to do. In fact, I think my third grade teacher reached out via Facebook to my mom like a couple years ago, or this summer when I graduated, and said, "You did it. You always said you were going to do it, and you did it." So that was really nice to see again, to know that it wasn't a lie. But my mom facilitated all of my history nerdery. We went to every museum. We traveled a lot around the country every summer. So I camped a lot. So I was a big outdoor person. You remember those like science nature guidebooks about birds and plants and all those? I had all of those. She took me, my great aunt was a school teacher and very, very strong woman. And she always took me to any archaeology site that I ever wanted to go to. Whenever we visited her in Arizona, she drove me around to literally all the places. And I did love dinosaurs too, just not as, that was a phase. But I was always people and history and relationships. I always loved it.
Very cool. What part of the country did you grow up in?
I started out in Wyoming until I was about in fourth grade. And then we moved back to where my mom grew up, is North Dakota. So I actually grew up for the rest of the time here in North Dakota. So always staying in the frozen north, I guess. I can't escape it.
But the nice thing about those is both those places have excellent museums and archaeology and kind of wide open spaces to explore and things like that. Yeah,
there was a canyon behind my house in Wyoming. So I lived in the southwest corner of Wyoming. So the closest place we used to go get groceries was Salt Lake. And we always drove to Salt Lake. We went camping all the time. And whenever we drove north to North Dakota for summers, we would go camping in Yellowstone, etc. Yeah, there was this big canyon that I used to go walking. It was a 2-mile walk there and back. And we'd always find artifacts and leave them where they were. But it was always fascinating to see what was in the canyon. That was kind of my first experience with actual artifacts. And weird that I never collected things. I was never a collector. I don't know if you guys ever picked up rocks. Some people pick up rocks. Other people pick up. I know other archaeologists that collect things throughout their lives too, or like the artifacts. But I've never been that person.
No. I can't say. I think I maybe I pick up quartz every now and then, but like nothing crazy, like nothing that intense. But
no, yeah, I don't have a klepto bone in my body.
Right.
It's like I just don't have the ability to think about where I want this in the future and that I need this or need to remove this from this certain place. It just doesn't click for me like that, which makes us great archaeologists because we don't have the temptation when we find these stuff in the field that we can just leave it and or preserve it.
1,000%. And so it's such a nice thing. It's so weird to find archaeologists that have had that past where they were collectors in the past, or it's just such a weird thing. But yeah, so Wyoming, part of the time, hiking.
Gotcha. So you lived in Wyoming up until like fourth grade, then you're out in South Dakota. So why did you decide to pursue
No. North Dakota.
North Dakota. My bad.
Ooh. Is that like a curse word? Is that mixing them up?
Words up here. North Dakota.
Yeah, I guess I wouldn't want to be associated with Kristi Noem either. So that makes sense. But why MSU Moorhead? How did you get connected there?
That's a really great question. So I never wavered from my desire to be an archaeologist, but there was only one moment in my mother's support of me where right when we had to start making decisions, where she was like, are you going to make any money? Is this going to be a career? And she runs her own, she's runs part of the North Dakota ITV, long distance education networks. And so she's really, she trained herself in Cisco networking. And so she taught that in high school. So I took networking classes as well. And there was the option to also go to school for networking instead. And that was like my one option where I was like, okay, is she right? Should I not do this? And then we went to MSUM because they were the closest regional archaeology program. And it was actually a really amazing, deep program here. And so I went and visited and I met one of my mentors and he was so funny and hilarious. And I never looked back. I thought he was the best, the absolute best. And then once I was here, I was only archaeology. I was a terrible student, awful student, except in archaeology. I only got A's in archaeology, and then I bombed other classes that I just wasn't interested in. I didn't want to take anything other than archaeology. And so I always like to tell my students, you can go and do whatever you want. They will let you do it. If you're interested enough, there's always a way to come back. Grades aren't everything. You can always make it happen, kind of thing. And I recognize my privilege in saying that. But yeah, I was such a terrible student until my junior year. And then my junior year, I was like, okay, I'm going to do this for real. And I decided to double major in geology. And I met my husband also at the same time. And then we kind of never looked back from that. I loved being here. The program is amazing. The combination of archaeology and geology is such a unique opportunity that just makes sense.
Yeah, I think geoarchaeologists are just straight up dirt wizards, like the way that they can just read the dirt. And I'm just like, man, that's impressive to have that ability just to kind of see a sidewall and just kind of know its history just by the soil composition. Just bonkers to me.
It does sound like wizardry, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's like Wingardium Leviosa. Okay, I know what this is going on. Yeah, stuff like that. And it's also for anyone out there listening, you should definitely take a geoart class as part of anything you do. And in archaeology, anthropology, it's probably the most important class you'll ever take. I wanted to ask, so obviously like anthropology and geology are related in some sense, but they're also vastly different. And one is very hard science and one is what they call a softer science. How did studying both of those go in school? So here we have this amazing program and two other mentors. So there were 3 archaeologists on staff here. One was my mentor who was a paleo Indian guy up for especially upper North Midwest. The other 2 were Mississippianists. And so that was actually, my archaeology experience, I was like everybody else who never really got any type of indigenous histories really in school. I did in Wyoming, actually. I had a lot of Plains history classes in Wyoming, but when I moved to North Dakota, big surprise, like nothing. And so when I went to school, I was still all set on what I call now like the sexy siren archaeology, because it's the one that everyone seems to be drawn to early on, like the classics and Egyptology and things like that. And I was really big into Egyptology, and I thought that was what I was going to do. And then here at MSUM, I met Dr. George Hawley and Renita Dalen, Dr. Renita Dalen, who had done this. They had done this huge survey, geophysics survey of Cahokia. They were Cahokianists, and I took a Mississippian class from Dr. Hawley, and Dr. Dalen kind of took me under her wing, and she really was my advisor and mentor through this whole process. She's such a badass geoarchaeologist. Like, you're talking about wizardry in science, like that is her with geophys. She's a wizard, a true wizard. She'd always tell us stories of her geophysics graduate program where she was like using dynamite to do seismic stuff. She's crazy. I love her.
But that was when I was going to do Mississippianist, right? And so she was this geoarchaeologist that glued the department together, because we had the geology and then the anthropology and then the archaeologists were the glue, but her particularly was the very specific glue that made it make sense, right? So she was teaching geoarchaeology, she was teaching remote sensing, she was teaching all of these classes. Now, after my grad career, I would say that's, I think the hard science, soft science debate is kind of a moot point to me these days, because there's different ways of understanding geology. There's different ways of knowing the earth too. And so having one department that combines earth and people and the history of all of those things, like, just makes sense. So that's where I am now too. So, and I'm trying to be the glue that keeps us together, which is difficult, but without my mentors. But yeah, I guess I don't know if I rambled.
No, that was great. You didn't ramble.
They fit really well for me. They just work. I don't know.
Excellent. Now, did you have to double up on courses? Or were there overlap in that double major?
I was one of the first to, that year, there was 2 of us that graduated with a geoarch. So that was the first time they'd created a geoarchaeology emphasis within geosciences. And so there was quite a bit of overlap on the archaeology side. And I'd already taken a ton of geology classes because they were here and I was interested in them. So I didn't have to take a lot of extra classes. So that worked out. There were a few extra classes in the geoscience that I had to take that I did not have to take in archaeology. For example, I had to take a stats class and a physics class. So there was some other, natural sciences stuff that I had to take.
At my undergraduate institution, intro to geology was one of the known hardest sciences to take, because you had this lecture. You had lecture twice a week, but then you had a lab with a different professor, and you had to at least get a C in the lab to pass the entire course. And that lab was hard. And I just talked with the dude one day, and he had his minor in archaeology and he had done archaeological projects. And when I told him what I was doing, he helped me out a lot. And I just went to office hours and chatted with him and got that A, helped me out a lot, and very excited to pass that class.
I can tell you that it was the exact opposite for me. It was the Rocks for Jocks course is what it was called. It was 200 people. It was a 200 people lecture that everyone passed because they wanted, and there was a lot of football players that were sitting in the back, not with headphones, not paying attention, but they would show up and do it. So
it is a similar stereotype. My husband, so I met my husband here, and he also graduated. So he's older than me by 3 years, and he graduated first with an archaeology degree from here, and then didn't like it. He was actually working for the White Earth nation up here, so the Ojibwe, and they were doing archaeology in that summer, and he just didn't want to do archaeology. He was like, this is not me. I want to come back and do geology. So he swapped and he came back. And the year I started is the year he started his second degree. So he went and did the geology degree, and I did both, but I went the archaeology route. And when he went to grad school, he taught, for his TA, he taught what he called Rocks for Jocks. And it was, he would always joke about it. It was always the football player. It's always football,
There was a line of them in the back of the class. You could just see it. It's it was very, very interesting.
So after you get your degree, you did CRM for a while.
I did.
Working at, it's the Illinois Survey. What is
the Illinois State Archaeology Survey.
That one. Yep.
Yeah.
And that's where Dr. Pocketot works, right?
It is. Yeah. He runs the show now over there, along with a lot of my good friends. Gotcha.
So you did that for almost 7 years before you started a master's program, and then you went to Urbana-Champaign.
Yeah, Shampoo Banana.
Yeah. So what led you to want to go for a graduate degree, starting it with the MA? Well,
so when I finished here, both my husband and I had intended to go to grad school, but you guys know what this is like when you love archaeology and you love history. For me, I didn't know what I wanted, since I was also a geoarchaeologist. I didn't know what my region of interest and particular, my focus was going to be. I wanted to do all of it. And with geoarchaeology, you could, right? You don't necessarily have to pick a spot. So I was really torn, and I kind of really just didn't know. I hadn't done enough yet to really focus. So I had sent out a few applications, but my heart really wasn't in it. And my husband and I actually both got into Akron. They were just starting a GeoArc program, and we had met these two geologists in a field school, a geology field school, that previous summer. And so they were recruiting us, and they'd gotten us this package, and we're like, okay, well, maybe we'll just do this. That sounds great. We'll both be in the program. He'll be in the geology one. I'll be GeoArc. And right before we were going to accept, we found out that our future advisors had a restraining order against each other. And we thought that probably wasn't going to be the most effective learning experience, but, having us be married and having advisors that were toxic already to begin with. So we ended up saying no. He got into University of Illinois, and I followed him there because I knew I could work at the survey, which was foundational to me figuring out what I wanted to do. It was amazing. So I started out as a lab grunt. It's like lab and field. I was such a jerk in the field because I questioned everything. I was such a jerk. I was like, why are we doing things this way? Why do we do it this way? Yeah, I think I just really wanted to be a boss, and I didn't really know it then. At one point, I stopped being in the field, and I was lucky enough. So if you don't know anything about the Illinois State Archaeology Survey, one, it's amazing. It's one of the biggest, if not the biggest, CRM firm in the nation. And being pulled under the state umbrella survey is really cool. It comes with its own headaches. I'm sure Dr. Pakatak could tell you all about it. And Dr. Emerson before him could tell you all about the hardships of trying to keep that place going. But it's amazing because you have all of these field stations. So you have the heart, which is in Champaign-Urbana, the heart of it. And that's kind of the research arm. So then we have all these field stations throughout Illinois. And I was lucky enough to be able to work full time in the lithics office. So they would send their, sites and the materials. Everyone else would process them elsewhere. And then I would get to look at them and write them up. So that was when I really got to utilize my geology background quite a bit and kind of find my niche. It was fun.
Excellent. And with that, we'll return with segment 2 of episode 99 of a Life in Ruins podcast. Stay tuned.
Welcome back to episode 99 of a Life in Ruins podcast. We are here with Dr. Amanda Butler, and we wanted to start off this segment by just kind of defining and talking about what is Cahokia. I think folks get introduced to it in archaeology in many classes, but just for our listeners, do you mind talking about what Cahokia is, when it occurs, and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm just going to tell you now, please, if you have questions or whatever, stop me, because I teach this and I get excited about it. So I will go on for quite some time. But I guess the basics that I would like a general public to know about Cahokia would be, one, to know that it exists, what it is. I think typically what's most exciting about it to at least my students and to me when I learned about Cahokia was that we have this giant, amazing metropolitan city in the middle of the Midwest, and it gets overlooked, right? And there's a whole host of long-term reasons why that is, and we can maybe dig into that in the next segment, maybe, if we want to. But that has to do with, the colonization of this country and why this particular important space gets looked over. But what is it? It is a Native American city. It is one of the largest and only Native American cities north of Mexico, which I think we always hate that comparison just because, those lines don't exist in the past. But for just giving the layman what it is, that seems to always help figure out the scope, I guess, of how big this place was. So where is it? It's in current modern day East St. Louis. You can actually think of it as 3 precincts. So you have Cahokia proper, which is, we call it downtown Cahokia. That is in East St. Louis. Then you have, in East St. Louis, or it's actually near Collinsville today. And then East St. Louis is the East St. Louis precinct, so that section of it. And then across the river is the St. Louis portion or metropolis part. And so all of them together or combined make up the urban center. But just like any urban center, it also has suburbs and other rings that come out. And so I think what they're calling it now is Greater Cahokia. So Greater Cahokia in and of itself, upwards of 30 to 40,000 people, just the core, the metropolis core. Once you get into Greater Cahokia, which extends, I don't remember how many miles out there now defining it, you can get significantly greater population numbers. Over 150 mounds. That is it's much higher than that, but they're all gone from plowing and settler colonialism coming in and completely demolishing these mounds for fill. So St. Louis actually used to be nicknamed Mound City. And then when settlers came, they used steam shovels and got rid of all of the mounds. So the fact that I think it's the third largest mound in North America was called Big Mound. And that one is completely gone. In fact, you can still go to the location where it's at, and there's a plaque on the sidewalk that says Big Mound. That's it. That's all that's left. So conservation is a real issue at Cahokia today, but you can go visit Cahokia. They have a wonderful museum. You can kind of walk around and check things out. The Big Mound, Monk's Mound, so this core of the city, which I would identify in my research as and others, was the religious core of the city, has Monk's Mound. And Monk's Mound is crazy big. There's a bunch of different comparisons that we like to throw out, especially when we're teaching, again, trying to get the scale of how big this place really is. The base of this mound is larger than the base of the Giza pyramid. It's huge. It's several stories tall. And these mounds are specific. So the way that since I don't have a PowerPoint to show you pictures of what it would be, but they're what we call truncated mounds. So they're very specific. So if you think of, say, Maya pyramids, right, where they're have the sloping sides and then a flat top. It's the same, but it's out of soil, right? And remember, there are no beasts of burden at this time, so they're all built by hand, by basket load, which we can see in the soil, and they're built they're very much constructed in a very particular way. It's not just throwing mounds of dirt onto these places, and not everybody lived on those mounds. Right? There was a hierarchy of who was able to be on those mounds. But it was just this crazy New York, we always like to call it kind of the New York City of its time. We do have strontium isotope evidence that shows that throughout the entire history of Cahokia, which the time period we're looking at is 1050 CE to about 1300 CE, it's very quick, right? It's very quick. It expands really far, all the way up to where I'm at. So I'm in Minnesota, so up to southern Minnesota, central Minnesota, and then Wisconsin, and all the way down to the Gulf Coast, the influence of what we call them, which would be the Mississippian culture. I should have led with that one, probably.
and like, I've always found it fascinating, like how quickly Cahokia gets populated, like the phases, like Sterling phase and Loman phase, like these things are like 100 years, how quickly a lot of these things are happening that you guys are able to identify in the record. Yeah. But like, there's also palisade walls. There's like wood henges, evidence for wood henges around, or what are they called? You know what I'm talking? Yeah.
No, they're called wood henges. Yeah. They call them wood henges. Yeah. So there's several rebuilt wood henges to the west of Monk's Mound. They found the old post holes from them. They were several iterations in different sizes through time. The palisades come later. So everything happens very quickly, right? So people are moving into the city very quickly. We know that there's a ton of immigrants coming in and out of the city. They have immigrant neighborhoods. We have distinct strontium isotope evidence that they're moving around, or people coming from all over. So not everybody would have spoken the same language. They definitely would have spoken similar dialects, but this was a really, truly metropolitan type of melting pot city. But yeah, the palisades come later. They pop up around 1200. So that's when things are starting to kind of change significantly. And there's a lot of different factors that are going into that. We have a lot of different ideas and theories about what's going on. But yeah, that's one of the first big pieces of archaeological evidence of things changing.
Very cool. I do love the comparison to New York City. And I also do love how it's like district wise. You have like your Soho, you have your Upper East Side, everything is already defined, and we kind of see it in that sort of terms. So how does something pop up in this scale and then go away within 250 years? Are there theories why and how it kind of popped up?
Yeah, there's quite a few. Part of the theoretical kind of mode that I am a part of is, and also realizing that humans are complex, right? And that we do weird things, and for a variety of reasons, and it's never monocausal ever, right? There's multitudes of reasons, but I always think of things as like a tapestry, right? And there's different threads in that tapestry that you can kind of identify as primary parts that make up the bigger picture. And for me, one of those main threads, or the primary threads of why Cahokia, is religion. This new religious movement happens. And religious movements all around the world at different times, it's actually pretty common. But this new religious movement happens right around 1050, just slightly a little bit before. But part of my research then is like taking that as this foundation of why Cahokia exists, this new religion. And then it spreads. So it spreads very quickly. And part of that is this kind of missionary movement of this bundled religion and these bundled religious practices. But yeah, and I think because it's religion and then it's tied to new ways of existing. So everything about Cahokia was new. A lot of things, right? New ways of living, new ways of organizing yourselves, new ways of actually aligning yourself to the cosmos in a completely different way. All of these things are new. So when you have something so new and it's a lot of different people, there's probably a variety of different reasons for why things start going south. But, 200 years, it's not a bad run. But it doesn't. And, Cahokia itself, the city changes, right? And so I'm teaching a kind of a class on collapse. And so we're problematizing collapse and the whole narrative of collapse because, part of it is maybe Cahokia, what we're seeing archaeologically, especially some of the major collapse narratives, is the elite, right? The elite are the ones that are affected by collapse narratives the most. The commoners, they just leave, right? They vote with their feet and leave. And Mississippian culture doesn't go away. Like, it doesn't disappear. People didn't disappear. They moved. Cahokia changed, but Cahokia as a city, as a center, there became other centers. And I think as it moved on.
So what was your dissertation exploring related to Cahokia? Because I met Dr. Pocketot when he was the keynote speaker at Plains in Bloomington, and his whole speech was on Cahokia, and I got to talk with him after. And that's when I was talking with him and my advisor, he had mentioned that he had been exploring this Caddoan connection with Cahokia, and we chatted about my research, and that was the last time I kind of saw him. But I've always had that in my mind when I was talking about what I was saying, and he was like smiling and kind of nodding his head. And then you show up at Plains a couple years later. So yeah, please, for audience, what were you looking at?
So I'm, for just knowledge, I am Tim Pocketot's former student. I'm one of his I'm a Pocketot student. So we all as a group, there's a group of us that really feel the data has shown us that religion is this causal factor, or religion can be this causal factor, instead of previous ways of thinking, which would be like economic reasons and very much logical kind of processual notes of still coming in. But religion as this cause, once you can get to that point, then you start, for me, the question was always, okay, how? Because one of the things that all of us archaeologists recognize who work in the Midwest and work in Mississippian was this Mississippian movement. It moves fast, and this influence is very quick, but it's different all over. And so how do we account for the differences that we're seeing in all these different places? And so they kind of slapped this term called Mississippianization on it, right? Which implies actually a lot, but no one really unpacked that. And that really bothered me. And so when I started getting into trying to think what my topic was going to be or what I was really interested in, I was like, I really would like to know how does Mississippianization work? What is it? What are we actually talking about? Because there's an underlying mechanism here that we're not addressing. And so if I'm going to think about Mississippianization as a part of, because really they wanted to talk about it, they're talking about it in a way of colonization, right? In a kind of a way. They're using terms like colonies, they're using terms like outposts. But for me, what if you put that into religion? What would that do? So from there, this is my long Amanda story of getting to the Caddo connections. I'll get there. So I was trying to unpack that and think about religion and how religion moves. So how does actually religion move? And thinking about from these missionary notes or like this idea of missionization, and then it came into bundling and how bundled thoughts, like bundled ideas, how can you bundle ideas and have those move in this particular way? And because I'd worked at the Illinois State Archaeology Survey and Tim was my advisor, I also had a really great mentor, Tom Emerson, who was the former director of the Illinois State Archaeology Survey. Formative, huge name in Mississippian archaeology. And he has always had this long interest in these ideas of the religious aspect of Cahokia, the parts that we really recognize as religion, might be coming from these ancestral Caddoan relationships. So he had written a few things with Gerard a few years ago, and then Tim also, because this religion factor came into it. Once I started doing my dissertation, I was like, it has to be this. Like, this is what I'm seeing. I'm seeing this pattern. I started reading a lot of oral histories, and just the oral histories as the foundational part of this religion and how it moves seems to have these very Caddoan relationships or threads.
And real quick, who are the Caddoans for the audience?
Right. So they're a Plains group today. They are in Oklahoma, Nebraska. They have ancestral homelands all throughout the Plains and Midwest and South. We know that they were one of the groups that were part of Cahokia because, again, remember, Cahokia is this multi-nation type of place but we don't typically, based on archaeology and other things, for some reason, we always think that ends once they get to the Missouri River, like that influence somehow ends at the Missouri River. And we stop talking about them as part of the Cahokia experience, if that makes sense. So I was obsessed when I was super pumped to meet Carlton because one, I know he was working you are Pawnee, but there are several different branches of the Caddoan nations, and the ancestral groups, one of them are Pawnee, and specifically the Skidi Pawnee. And that was why what I think, and I'm following some other people here, and Tom Emerson being one of them, and Tim Pochat being another, of drawing these connections from ancestral Pawnee, the Skidi Pawnee. The structure of the religion that we see, the structural nature of the religious evidence that we see at Cahokia, seems to have these direct lines to ancestral Skidi Pawnee. So there's some type of knowledge keeping happening through time that seems to be really interesting for me as a possible lead to look at being this foundational part of why Cahokia became so big so quickly. Like, were they part of the original religious movement, right? Because again, it becomes, as you move through these different places all over, you're meeting different people, different places, different other peoples, and the archaeological work is going to look different because those adoptions are going to look different for how they work through the original religious components of that bundle. But they're so similar still underlying, and that's the part that everyone recognized as Mississippianization, but because no one was defining it, I don't think we really got at the big question here, which I would argue is, again, where is it coming from? And so part of my dissertation was really looking at, is it possible that this original one, how is it moving and where is it coming from? And so those were two of my big questions. And I was hypothesizing and wanting to talk to Carlton about working or thinking about Pawnee connections to the origin of Mississippian religion. That is the point, I guess. And I don't know if I made that right.
No, you did. It was a lot of fun talking to you about it at like 11 o'clock at night after a long day. It was a night. It was a lot of fun. And
I hounded him. I just went right over to his table and I was like, you don't know me, but I have some things I would like to ask you.
Can I guess at the context at where this was occurring at 11 o'clock at night? Say in a place where they serve alcohol? Okay. Yeah. I didn't know if it was...
There was definitely alcohol.
Yeah. There absolutely was.
Remember I said I was hiding in the corner trying to find new friends and trying to observe, and I was like, okay, I'm ready.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. I really liked your dissertation, and it actually really helped me out recently with my prospectus, tying a lot of that stuff in. So I have a lot of Butler 2021 spread out through the entire document. So it was great. So yeah, I'm really excited about your research. And with that, we'll go ahead and end segment 2. We'll be right back with Dr. Butler on episode 99. And welcome back to episode 99. We are still here with Dr. Amanda Butler. And for this segment, we're gonna be getting into some pseudo-archaeology television, some trash TV, as you will. And in the green room earlier, you were talking about The Curse of Oak Island, and that you have a guilty pleasure for that show. I don't think we've ever talked about Curse of Oak Island here. Ancient Aliens comes up a lot. Whatever Megan Fox's horrible archaeology show has popped up once or twice. But so what is it about The Curse of Oak Island?
So, I'm human and I love trashy shows like anybody else, especially big train wrecks. But when I was a kid, I loved mysteries too, right? I was obsessed. We talk about dinosaurs. I was obsessed with the Loch Ness Monster for, I think, way too long than I probably should have been. But I love them. And Oak Island was actually one of the mysteries that I was obsessed with when I was little. I always thought it was pirate treasure that was buried, and it's definitely pirate booby traps on this island. And so when they did this show, now as an adult as an archaeologist, I had high hopes for it. And of course they let me down. But it's interesting. I think I show several episodes of this particular one in class. I don't know. Have you guys watched it?
I remember when it first came out, but I could never really get into it because it was just so slow. And it's just, there's always water that they can never seem to get rid of. And I don't know how you can make 7 seasons of guys just trying to pump out a well. And it's interesting.
Yeah, I feel like I listened to or watched a couple episodes in the middle of it, and they're like, we're 30 feet down and we're finding stuff. And I'm like, I need a lot more context to understand how you got to this point. So I never really gave it a chance. They're like,
oh man, you guys are missing out. You're missing out. Let me just tell you. So this one, it's this evolutionary process of what it's like for, I think, a general public who is very monetarily oriented. They're after treasure, right? Very specific goal here. They are after treasure. They did not receive or need any archaeological permits to excavate. One, they bought the whole island. So they own the whole island. These 2 brothers, one is an engineering dude who's a millionaire engineering firm, and his big brother who's always been obsessed with Oak Island, and he was a postmaster his whole life. He was just a postman. And the little brother is like, I'm going to make my big brother's dream come true. And we're going to go do this and we're going to find the treasure. So they didn't have to have permits because it was private land, and had been completely trashed. The whole, this whole area where the money pit supposedly was, had been so trashed from decades upon decades, 100 years or more of digging, looking for this treasure. So archaeology wasn't really in their purview. Then things started getting weird. They started finding things outside because, there were always water everywhere because they're just putting pipes. They're just drilling into the ground and being like, oh man, where are we going to find pipe water? Oh, we found this piece of wood. Is it Searcher Tunnel or old Searcher Tunnel? And so what was interesting right off is, even though archaeology wasn't on their mind, they were very interested in making sure it was scientifically sound. So they would try to find experts to look at their stuff and tell them dates wise, right? So at least they were bringing in scientists. Now, at some point, they started looking elsewhere beyond the money pit, and they realized there's a lot of other things happening on this island. And that's when they were forced to bring on an archaeologist. And that was a real contentious relationship on camera. They were like, grumble archaeology. And so pseudo archaeology, it was the same as any other show, right? Where they pit the public against the archaeologist as, some gatekeeper of knowledge and secret knowledge that we all keep from everybody on the council. So it ended up being this really interesting relationship. And now, I don't know, they're on season 9 now, and legit, they're finding stuff. Like, they actually had 5 or 6 archaeologists on staff this last season because they are finding things in the 1400s. They have like a 1400. It's crazy. They've legit found this whole place is an archaeological site. There's definitely an old ship wharf there from the late 1400s, early 1500s. Yeah, they found a lot. There's more than just whatever this treasure is interesting. But then they had to fire their archaeologists.
So Oak Island is an island off of Nova Scotia in Canada. So it's like way up northeast. So that dock you're talking about, is it like a Danish Viking origin?
Right. Yeah. Well, so their dates are wildly weird. So they have medieval dates of some lead artifacts, like 1100 dates. But that, if they were coming on ships or part of old parts of treasure or whatever, then that makes sense. They're coming from somewhere older over there. But I think 1500s is the earliest of like solid grouping of dates that they have for these ship pieces. And they have pieces of ships that they're digging out of this big swamp. But in this swamp, they excavated this huge stone paved roadway, and it had huge word things. The metal, they're like metal spikes with hoops in them. They're called something, and I can't think of what they're called. But they were meant to pull heavy things up and over this road, right? So like to drag them. Yeah, and so they have that, and they ended up having to stop because below one of these levels, they finally ran into Mi'kmaq pottery. And so then they got the kibosh put on them, and they made it sound like, the bad archaeologists are making them stop, and especially pitting them against indigenous nations, First Nations in Canada, making them look really awful, the Oak Island people. And they just decided to be angry about it. And instead of working through this really complex archaeological conversation that a lot of people have to have, they ignored it, shut that whole part down on the island, and are now back to just digging in the money pit for the treasure.
And like this whole thing is bonkers because like the theories behind the treasure is for like Knights Templar, Aztec gold, like just this. Ooh,
you hitting all that, you checking them all.
Yeah, it's like, and people like you've been saying have been excavating there for years, and like, where did the origin of this tiny island in Nova Scotia having this mystical treasure?
I know. Like, why this island? And the thing is they keep finding stuff that's like, it's seriously, legitimately confusing. I mean, they have a lead seal that they just dated to the 1500s, I want to say. That's from the English crown that they put on large, like bales of clothes, like bales of cotton or bales of like large goods. And it's a lead seal with a stamp in it that they just found. It just makes no sense. And the wood in the tunnel where this treasure is, they've dug up wood that dates to the 1300s. Again, it's waterlogged, so you're going to have water issues. But of course, they don't explain any of those. But yeah, it's just from an archaeological standpoint, it's one of the more interesting trash TV shows out there for me because I love to hate it, and I'm legitimately intrigued with everything that they keep bringing up because you're like, oh my god, they keep bringing on these crackpot theorists for like the Knights Templar, but then they found a lead cross that they not only dated, but then they did sourcing of where the lead came from, and it came from the south of France. Like, I don't know. I'm genuinely confused.
So do you think they're not working with archaeologists and only releasing small amounts of data so it may look complex, or is it really just that weird and strange? Because I feel like that's part of archaeology, is this contextualizing multiple researchers people working and trying to ask different questions. But if you just start digging and you find just a random artifact isolated by itself in some waterlogged hole that you created, like, you need those other bits and pieces around it to understand what's really going on. So do you think it's just that complex, or are they just not doing it right?
I legit can't have a real opinion about that, because I don't know what the searcher pit area where they're treasure hunting. That is just a whole pile of crazy. I mean, there's a bunch of old digger tunnels. Other searchers have died looking for this, drowning in those deep holes that they've made themselves. And they have pulled up some really interesting stuff. But I think what's interesting on the archaeological side for me is that outside of the searcher pit, so ignoring the treasure, right, which is hard for the people who are interested in this show, the archaeology is legit. And I think that is what surprised all the archaeologists that they brought on, was they realized they had in situ real contextual archaeological history that shouldn't be there. According to all their historic documents, there's nothing that should be there. And yet they have real archaeological data popping up at various parts around the island. So to your question specifically, I'm not sure if they're releasing all of that information, especially the stuff that archaeologists are doing, because it's going to be a lot slower. So I'm not sure that, but the archaeologists were also seriously confounded when that roadway popped up, and they're finding ox shoes along that road. So they're hauling stuff, like big stuff, and it shouldn't be there. To them and their historic knowledge, it shouldn't be there.
I think it's like going to the context. People have been looking for this gold since like the early 1790s. So that yes. Immediate area around the money pit has just like all context is lost. But I wonder if like part of that is, we know in New England, the East Coast, looting was rampant of mounds. And like part of me thinks is like, because people thought there was a treasure in this spot, they left the landscape alone. So now when they brought archaeologists and start working outside the money pit, and they're like, wait a second, it's because looters were digging in the money pit. That's where they thought the treasure was. They didn't need to go anywhere else. And everything just kind of as an offshoot of this crazy story by like one dude who supposedly sailed with Captain Kidd. And like, that's where Captain Kidd buried the treasure. Like it just keeps going. The levels of that you have to get in here is just
coconut fiber. That's the one that for the pirate theory, like they found coconut fiber along the beach areas and like packed in different spaces. So it's just things that shouldn't exist do on Oak Island. I don't know. Maybe it's a realm, a spinning between the realms. Who knows? But that one is that's my current fave, my guilty pleasure that I watch. I did binge watch because I'm in Minnesota and we have the Kensington Runestone so close by.
Oh,
and
God.
I have a lot of people who bring that discussion to me a lot, or Viking swords and all that crazy. I did watch one. Do you guys remember? So the movie Fargo, the guy that fed his friend to the wood chipper, that guy.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So he became the actor became obsessed because of his time here filming Fargo, became obsessed with the Kensington Runestone. And he decided that he was with some random local dude from Minnesota, him and this guy, they were going to solve the mystery of the Kensington Runestone. And I'd forget what it's called. If it's called like the Viking Runestone. It just came out last year, but I ended up buying. I hate giving my money, but I had to. I tell myself it's for educational purposes. I watched the whole thing and it was awful, right? And all of the weird things. And they also have this guy, if you guys come across in all of your trash TV shows, Scott Walter. Have you heard that name?
I have not.
He calls himself. He had his own show called America Unearthed. And he calls himself a forensic geologist. So that's the title that he gives himself. He is a forensic geologist, which is not real. But that's what he calls himself. And I showed the third episode of the first season to my students when we do our pseudo-arc, because it's local. He brings them out here and talks to local farmers who think that archaeologists are keeping the truth of Vikings and Viking history here. And so we talk about it in class about how those types of narratives, especially in places like this, you can make sense of it from this immigrant perspective, sure, but understand that you are erasing real people's history here and you are negating an entire culture that is not yours. And he does it. He brings in the runestone, he brings in everything. And this new series that I was watching, the Viking runestone, he becomes really best friends with this two duo group that are doing this whole thing. And he brings in then he connects the Knights Templar. I don't know, why does everyone want to connect the Knights Templar? What is it?
I don't know. So it's called Secrets of the Viking Stone. It's 12 episodes. Yes. I think I'm gonna have to start watching that. But even I've seen it even in northern Oklahoma, where people talk about how Vikings got to northern Oklahoma. But you look back at the immigrant history and like who's dominating, like especially the Great Lakes region, the Dakotas and Nebraska. And it's like Eastern Europeans, Scandinavians, especially and they're bringing that with them. And then the Viking runestone is a known fake,
a known fraud.
It's known.
Right. I know. Right. Well, the archaeologists are the ones telling you. So, yeah. It's been tested a billion times, a bunch of different ways. And of course, the Scott Wolter, this forensic geologist, he was given access to it years ago to test. And of course, his tests and then claim that it's real. And this is why I hate how science is used as a weapon a lot, especially to lay people who don't understand it, because I call it science with a big S. They make it sound very technical and scary. And then people will just believe what you say because, well, I mean, I guess depends on what you're saying. If it's something else, maybe they don't care. But this in particular, if science with a big S sounds very technical about mica and all kinds of things of leaving or being washed out. And that's how you can tell it's real. But it's been tested. And the one thing I will say about this particular show is they brought on and let real archaeologists speak extensively and counter every single point, whether or not the public listens to that. So more so than any other shows, they brought on my mentor, Mike McClovic. He was on there. They had quite a few actual people, but there was a Swedish interpreter, Swedish language expert, and he read the runestone and he's like, regardless of if the stone itself is real or the carvings are real, what's written is modern Swedish. So the ruins of what they're actually depicting is modern Swedish. So it's not real. It doesn't matter what you're testing the stone and all of that. It's modern Swedish.
That's amazing.
That's wild.
Oh boy. Well, before we end the show today, Amanda, what are a couple sources? These could be books, articles, videos that you would recommend for anyone interested in Cahokia. And we'll throw links to some of this Kensington runestone stuff and Curse of Oak Island for anyone interested. But what about Cahokia? Where can our listeners find out more about Cahokia?
So I think it's an overwhelming amount of information. And so some of my favorite ones to check out, especially, so one is my really great friend and colleague, Sarah Bidres. She produced a book called Land of Water, City of the Dead, Religion and Cahokia's Emergence. That one's going to be more of an academic kind of stuff. It's good for anybody, but it is going to be more in the academic world. But I think it really does a great job of highlighting religion as this causal factor for really driving Cahokia's emergence. And then, of course, my good old advisor, Timothy Pagatat, one of his most, I think, highly read books because it is so easy for anybody to understand. It's just your basic, I don't know anything about Cahokia, tell me about it book. Cahokia, Ancient America's Great City on the Mississippi. That's a really great one. And then also I just wanted to throw out PBS's Native America. It's just a really great documentary on, it connects a lot of other really great cities and sites throughout throughout North America. But it does, especially episode 3, highlight Cahokia and Cahokia's religious importance or the dominance of religion at Cahokia. So those would be my 3 go-tos. All
right. And well, David's not here. So where can our listeners find you on social media?
So it was such a great question that you asked me because I was like, man, I'm actually kind of really private. I don't really do it. I should really work on that. I do have a public Twitter that I use not very well, but I'm trying to get better at that. So if you wanted to reach out via the social media at me or whatever, you can find me at ArchaeoJoes on Twitter. And then just through basic email, amanda.butler@mnstate.edu. Love to hear from anybody if you have questions. Don't be shy.
Sweet. And we'll have the Twitter handle and the email in the episode description, whatever platform you're listening to this episode.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, absolutely. And because this is a life in ruins, we have to ask you the question. If you were given the chance to do it again, would you still choose to live a life in ruins?
1,000%. Yeah. Never look back.
Excellent. Well, everyone, we just interviewed Dr. Amanda Butler. You can find her on Twitter at Archaeojos and by email, amanda.butler@mnstate.edu. Please be sure to rate and review the podcast and provide us with any feedback, whichever podcasting platform you're using to listen to our show. Remember, if you leave us a review on iTunes and email us letting us know you left a review, we will send you stickers. We have succumbed to bribes. So please rate and review. And we look forward to the next episode.
Spotify now has a place to review and rate stuff too now, so please do that on Spotify.
Ooh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, they didn't have that before, but they do have it now. So please send it to David and overwhelm him with the amount of stickers that he will have to send out, or Carlton.
Yeah, either or. I'm trying to see what was our latest review. Like, see if it's changed. If it hasn't changed, I'm gonna be upset, guys.
It's still the same one, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
We're not mad. We're just disappointed.
We are just disappointed. I'm looking on Spotify. I'm not even on iTunes. I'm like, why can't I even pull it up? And the reason being, because I'm an idiot.
So on January 25th, we have a review that says, such a great show, very knowledgeable yet relaxed. It's always interesting to see what the guest brings to the table, and I'm always blown away, inspired. You're getting me through my nth degree.
Yes. So thank you. Phenomenal. And reach out to us to get your free sticker. And that was just the title of the thing. The username is JMJoe. Oh, I can't read either. Oh, I see it. Yeah. Fair enough. All right. And with that, we are truly out. Thanks for listening to A Life in Ruins podcast.
You can follow us on Instagram and Facebook at A Life in Ruins Podcast, and you can also email us at alifeinruinspodcast@gmail.com.
And remember, make sure to bring your archaeologists in from the cold and feed them beer.
All right, Connor, it's that time.
This one is particularly bad. So, you know what they say, it takes guts to be an organ donor.
Thank you, Connor. Thank you very much. And thank you. All right. And with that, we are out.
This episode was produced by Chris Webster from his RV traveling the United States, Tristan Boyle in Scotland, DigTech LLC, Cultural Media, and the Archaeology Podcast Network, and was edited by Chris Webster.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.archpodnet.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.